Hey everyone, my name is Penny Zenker, and it's time to reset. This podcast goes beyond just navigating change. It's about new ways of thinking about how you can approach challenges, how you can shift your mindset when needed, create some space and grace for yourself so that you can rethink, recharge, and reprioritize when and where needed. Are you ready to unlock your full potential? Thank you for hitting play and sharing this next episode with me. It's time to reset. Hello and welcome to Take Back Time. My name is Penny Zenker and I'm your host. And today we're going to talk about some important topics that help us to be more productive, right? Today's show is going to talk about building confidence and things that help you to be more productive, right? There are things that we don't necessarily think of when we think of productivity that make all the difference for us to show up at our best. So, and I'm super excited today to have Heather Monahan with me. She is a superstar and a bestselling author, 2 times bestselling author in this category. She's got a new book that's just come out recently. She's a top 50 keynote speaker in the world for 2022 and podcast host, TEDx speaker, and many, many other things on this that you can check the show notes and see how accomplished she is. But I want you to hear from her as soon as possible. So Heather, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me.
So people may not know you and know your story. You know, I kind of wanted to start and use a little bit of, one of the best-selling books that you wrote was around confidence. I think the world has a challenge. Everyone has that sort of inner feeling inside that says, am I enough? Right. And I know I do. So, and I know you talk about it and I know many people who do. And then there's imposter syndrome. What's your story and how did you, kind of make this sort of your purpose is to helping people to build their confidence?
It happened completely by accident. I grew up poor and I've been working since I was 9 years old. So my whole focus was just to make a lot of money because I didn't want to be poor anymore. And that led me to getting in the radio business, which led me to ultimately, becoming a C-suite executive and being named one of the most influential women in radio. And while I was ascending and collecting all these awards and paychecks and whatnot, I really wasn't fulfilled with what I was doing. And I started asking myself, there's got to be something more to all of this out there. I wonder what it is, right? And just asking those questions, and which ultimately led me to getting fired 14 years into this one company that I'd worked for and been promoted, 3 times. I ended up getting fired when the CEO I worked for became ill and he elevated his daughter to replace him. And she terminated me immediately. And that was the first time in my life that I remember, being fired or something. I'm a type A overachiever. So it was a really big pivotal moment in my life. And it ultimately led me down this new path, which was writing my first book, Confidence Creator, and sharing the blueprint on how to create confidence in any moment. And then launching my podcast and then signing with HarperCollins Leadership and then launching my speaking career. It just led me down this completely different trajectory, which has been such a blessing and really catapulted me into what I was meant to do from a purpose and meaningful standpoint. Right. But I definitely stumbled into it. It wasn't something that I did by design.
I think a lot of people stumble into it. There's this thing that people think that you just know your purpose and you just find it. I think that we gather up, as I think you use the words, gather things up along the way. And it's those experiences that we have that really shine a light on where we're best needed, let's say. I wanted to ask you, so you said, you were driven, you didn't have a lot of money. So, you were driven to build your career. I know that when you get fired and, divorce, and I totally know that we can talk about those types of things and how they shake your confidence. But where was your confidence level when you were building yourself over those years before you got fired? Were you like super confident? What were you before the firing incident?
I believe that confidence ebbs and flows, right? So when I first gave birth to my son, I wasn't a confident mother. I was a rookie mother, right? I had no experience and I lacked confidence. Now my son's 15. I'm much more confident as a mother, right? But it wasn't a straight line. And to look back on my life before I got fired, Of course, there were, if I was going into a presentation for 1,000 people and I'd done thousands of them, I'm super confident walking into that situation. However, my personal life back then, I was not confident at all. I was divorced, right? And I doubted it. Was I worthy of love, right? So it depends on, I'm super confident in the gym back then and still to this day. So it just depends on different aspects of your life and at different times. Confidence is like a muscle that needs to be worked. And the more work you put in, the more you show up, routinely and execute on that, the stronger you're going to become. So it definitely has ebbed and flowed for me.
Yeah. That's a really good point. I hadn't thought of it like that, right? That it's an ebb and flow, but it totally is. Because even as parenting, if you use that as an example, right? Like maybe you feel this way too. I mean, I feel more, my kids are 16 and 18. And I guess in some ways I feel more confident as a parent, but in other ways, right? It's always a new stage. And as soon as you get used to that old stage, they change. And then you've got, the next stage. So I think there definitely is that ebb and flow, and we change and we're different and we have different approaches and we're trying different things on. And that can at first be challenging when we try a new strategy or something like that. So absolutely. So you had this moment, right, where you were fired. You had said you were divorced earlier. How did that shake your confidence? Because I know there's a lot. I mean, divorce is very common. And I think that is a huge confidence shaker for people.
Yeah, divorce was such a gift for me. It really gave me this opportunity to reevaluate my entire life, to say, okay, wait a minute, how did I end up divorced with a 1-year-old child, and really start asking those deep questions of myself, like, who am I that, made these wrong choices? How did I come down this wrong path? And how do I reconstruct things so that moving forward, I can do a better job, to show up and lead my child? And that really took me down a personal growth journey path that I hadn't been as committed to before, and definitely changed my life.
I think those lessons that we get, they build our confidence because we learn how to be more resilient, right? Resilience is a muscle too, right? And I think maybe it comes hand in hand, confidence and resilience together, that the more we let the two of them work together, the more we grow and the more, I guess, comfortable with uncertainty we are, so that we can be confident even in uncertain situations. Would you agree with that? I see you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Is there anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, just that resilience and confidence definitely go hand in hand for sure.
You said in your book, you talk about a blueprint for confidence. Do you want to share a couple of tips from there of people who, they might be listening, say, oh, well, look at you, you're a beautiful woman and you have all this going for you, but I don't. And so what would you say to somebody who's really in a place right now who's shaken confidence and could use a tip or two?
Oh my gosh, that's a cop out, right? To look at somebody on the outside and form your own story about what their life is like, what is easy for them, is a complete and total cop out. So I'd say number one, get real, right?
But don't we all do it? I mean, it's a cop out, but it's very common, right? That we create stories, that we make assumptions, that we make excuses so that we don't have to take the risk.
And that's the work. That's the work, is to pause every time you catch yourself doing that, to say, is this really helping to develop my highest good? No, it's not. Right. So the answer is always to look in the mirror, not to look, outside, and to think, okay, what is it about me? If you see someone and you're attributing all their success to like whatever you think that they have, there's some resistance there that you need to say to yourself, okay, wait a minute. Am I jealous that I don't have the success, or am I trying to come up with excuses? If so, what is that next step that I can take to do something different? And, really my first book, Confidence Creator, is all about the different steps people can implement in their life to form confidence, no matter what your current situation is and no matter where you are. I share a tremendous amount of low moments in my life and when my confidence was completely wiped out and how I brought it back. Some of the different tactics in the book are a sneaky one that had really haunted me for a long time, was self-deprecating humor. In business, I had become very successful, but I was still making jokes publicly about my blonde hair or blonde moment, or, really putting myself down. And ultimately, I share a story of a coworker of mine pulling me aside after and saying, you realize you're teaching people how to treat you. So when you show up and put yourself down all the time, even though you think you're doing it tongue in cheek, being funny, you're not earning any favor. In fact, you're telling people to go ahead and to put you down as well. And so that was a big eye opener for me.
I know we only have a short amount of time here, so I also want to touch a little bit on your new book and where that's headed. And let's start with, how did you go from confidence to the topic of overcoming your villains? I guess, they're hand in hand, but what was the bridge for you to move to that?
Well, for me, one thing is data doesn't lie, right? So I'm always looking at the data, and social media, whether people like social media or not, it offers data and feedback for you. So after having launched my first book, I was getting a tremendous amount of DMs from people on social media saying, okay, well, then what happened next? Because my first book really ends with me getting fired. So my second book begins with me getting fired and talks about that journey from getting fired from corporate America and then reinventing yourself and the challenges you need to overcome. And so to your point that confidence and overcoming your villains do go hand in hand, it's so clear to me now the importance of getting rid of the negative people in your life in order to become your most powerful and confident self. And this isn't something that I had really embraced when I was younger. I had instead seen it the other way. I thought, okay, well, I'm working side by side with a woman who doesn't like me, who ignores me, who doesn't treat me well. I turn a blind eye to her and just continue on my path and I'm my best self. What I didn't realize is when you turn a blind eye to bad behavior, it starts weakening you over time and you become a lesser version of yourself. You'll never be your most confident, powerful self as long as you allow negative people who are trying to hold you back in your space. And I kept getting questions about that. And, all the data was really leading me to this need to write second book, Overcome Your Villains.
Awesome. So it's kind of like the two-parter in the inner growth and the inner look in the mirror, and then looking around you in the environment that you're creating and seeing that you're creating an environment with the right people that are supporting you to bring out the best in you and helping you to move forward.
Well, Overcome Your Villains also looks into, a big part of the book is, sometimes the villain is ultimately you. But for me, I had to get rid of the villains around me in order to discover that the biggest villain I was dealing with was the one within me. And I think a lot of people share that. When you have a lot of villains around you, you're too busy trying to deflect and trying to protect yourself and trying to just keep things on course. You don't have that reflective time to really say, okay, let me sit down for a minute and see what I'm thinking. You're always reacting to everybody around you. So once I cleared the deck and got rid of those villains, that's when I had those first moments to say, okay, wait a minute, I'm getting a lot of negative feedback from me. This is, right now, I'm my biggest villain. I've got to figure out how I can overcome that.
When I think also, it's easy to blame other people around us, right? And so if you eliminate those people, then there's the only one to blame that's left is you, right? For what is holding you back. So that makes sense. What's one or two things that you'd like to share from your new book that may support people on their personal growth journey?
So the new book, Overcome Your Villains, details a 3-step process to overcome any adversity in business and in life. And I'll share that process. It's called BAK, B-A-K, which is beliefs, action, and knowledge. And I'll use the example of when I got fired because I think it's pretty relatable. The day that I got fired, I walked out of that woman's office saying, I've lost everything. I've lost it all. I've lost everything. I just kept saying that. Those are the moments where you have to stop and identify what simple shred of fact is within this belief that you're holding. And when I did that, I realized I hadn't lost my health, hadn't lost my business expertise. I hadn't lost my network. I hadn't lost my business acumen. I hadn't lost all my experiences. I hadn't lost my friends. I hadn't lost anything. The one thing I did lose was a paycheck. And when I had dialed it down to that simple shred of fact, it suddenly wasn't so overwhelming. I had received many different paychecks from many different companies across my career. And suddenly it was much more manageable than this idea of I've lost everything. So that's step one, dial that belief down to the most simple shred of fact. Step two, immediately you want to take action. And so for me, my action step was I posted to social media. I said, I've just been fired. If I've ever done anything to help you, I need to hear from you now. And that post went viral and landed me on the Elvis Duran show, right? Which is step 3, knowledge. Be really intentional about who you're accessing knowledge from. Elvis Duran was light years ahead of me, had 10 million listeners a day listening to his show. And halfway through that interview, he looks at me and says, well, Heather, obviously you're writing a book. And I wasn't writing a book at that time, but someone that was so far ahead of where I wanted to be spoke a truth and a belief into me. And I was able to grab hold of that belief and run with it. So, belief, number 1, dial it down to the most simple shred of fact, immediately take some type of action. And number 3, be really intentional about the knowledge that you seek and surround yourself with moving through the challenging time.
Awesome. I love it. So maybe share with us one of the challenges that you had along that process. You know what I mean? As you were, it may appear to some people, like I'm always the devil's advocate for people who are listening, right? And they're like, well, it sounds like it came really easy to you to write a book and to fall into these next steps. So, and I'm sure that wasn't the case, right? So just to put some more context and relativity to it, what was one of the biggest challenges that you had to overcome during that period as you were discovering those 3 steps, right? It's not like all of a sudden you were like, okay, I've got these 3 steps and I'm going to do them. It's in retrospect, right? That you're saying, here's what really supported you. So what was like 1 or 2 of those challenges that people can relate to?
One of the things that I think back on, because I had found success in corporate America, right? And I think a lot of people relate to this. You start thinking, okay, maybe I'm successful because of the company. Maybe I'm successful because of the industry. Maybe I'm successful because of the title, because of my team. You start attributing your success to all these things outside of you and really questioning, could you be successful if you didn't have those things? And I definitely went through that. This identity struggle of who am I without that industry that I've been in for 25 years? Who am I without that team, without that company, without that paycheck, without that title? Maybe I'm not as good as I thought I was. And really making the decision to abandon the labels, drop the labels, blow up the lanes and say, I'm just going to take my unique skills and talents wherever I want to go and go for it, not knowing and starting to become a little bit more comfortable living in that unknown, because that's really where all the magic happens, right? That's where the creativity comes from. That's where the book ideas come from, or the podcast ideas, or whatever it may be, or the evolution to who you're becoming. You allow for all of that when you do drop the labels, when you do drop the lanes and just start showing up as yourself.
Yeah, I love that. That's where the magic happens, is in that uncertainty and in that unknown, because otherwise we're not getting creative, right? We're stuck in old beliefs or old ways of looking at things, or what is versus what could be. So that's really, really powerful. So, the show is about taking back time and productivity. So I want to kind of make the link, right? So people are like, wow, why are you talking about all this stuff about confidence and, taking yourself forward in personal growth? How do you link that to productivity? So maybe first we'll start with what's your definition of productivity and why, and then how do you link what you do and what you teach and how that links to productivity?
Productivity to me is really tied back to passion and purpose in life. You can be productive at work, doing whatever it is, the job that you have ahead of you. But if you're not really committed or tied to that from some passion or bigger purpose level, what does it really matter? What does it really mean to me? And again, I didn't live my whole life like this, right? When I was younger, I used to think like, just get into work, get the job done, hit the KPIs and get out of there. But to me now, I just realized life is so much more important than that. And that legacy that you leave behind, that's what the productivity is about. The message and the teachings for your children and the generations to come after you, and how you can impact and inspire others and do good in the world. To me, that's what real productivity is about. It's about that legacy.
Yeah, I agree that it's passion and purpose. You might have some people who are thinking, well, geez, I'm not in a place that I can really create a legacy, because maybe they're not yet practicing bigger thinking or thinking of potential. I used to take karate with my kids, and they would sit us down and give it like a 10-minute thing at the end of the session about different types of leadership. And one of them was about legacy. And it was about how every day we leave a legacy, right? Every person that we come in contact with, every interaction that we have, we're actually leaving a legacy. We're touching people all the time, every day, whether you're a parent, whether you're a child at school and, helping another child, or whatever it is. And that sort of switched something for me, right? For me to switch what it means to create a legacy. So I just wanted to maybe bring that up to, see what your thoughts are on that, and also have the listeners, maybe see another perspective around what they might have defined legacy as.
Yeah, like anything, it's just important to start asking yourself those questions. Like, what is that legacy that you want to leave behind? And like you said, it doesn't have to be the biggest thing in the world, but just to start thinking about those questions, that's what can take you down a path to open up those possibilities and where you're really meant to be and where you're really meant to go.
Yeah, absolutely. It reminds me of a story that I tell sometimes when I'm talking about connecting to our purpose and whatnot, is that, people are doing their jobs day in and day out, and they get caught up a lot of times with the minutia and not with what the higher purpose is of what they're doing and how it supports the organization. And, for instance, there was this man who was really down on himself, and he came into the doctor's office and was depressed and was talking about how he's really worthless and he's just a hand worker and he works for the Department of Transportation. And my friend's a doctor who saw him when he came in, and he said to him, so you save lives. And it just shifted his entire demeanor for him to understand that he was just missing the higher purpose, that he's helping other people to get home to their families safely. And that makes a whole big difference, right? So we can look at whatever we do in a much connecting with a higher purpose, or we can get caught up in the little things. So I think it's important that we remember that no matter where we are in our life and in our ability to create impact.
Absolutely.
So I don't know if you have, any of those types of stories that, that come up for you that might also help some people who are thinking about, how do I think bigger? How do I connect what I'm doing with something greater that makes a higher meaning?
For me, I remember a mentor when I was younger said to me, is this it? You just want to be in corporate America and just, getting to the highest level and making the most money? And I said, that's a fair question. I don't know. I'm sure there's something more out there, but I just don't know what that is. And he said, keep asking yourself the question. So that was something I would write on my to-do list every day. Like, what is it that's bigger out there for me? Just to start asking those questions and be willing to receive those answers. And ultimately that landed me on a board seat for a charity. And I started doing a lot of charity work. I was working with City Year Miami for almost a decade. And that opportunity to get in and really start doing charity work opened up my eyes to how much joy I received from giving back and from helping others. And then that led me to stages. I started emceeing our events. I started hosting our events. I started getting great feedback on it. Just led me down this completely different path that I would never have found if I wasn't asking those questions to begin with, which then comes full circle to what I do now. So it just starts with being willing to ask the question and be willing to receive the signs that are going to show up for you.
Totally. Do you have a question that is your guiding question?
What would Jesus do? I don't know. When I fumble or stumble, I ask myself, what would God do in this situation? Like looking beyond myself and just try to take me back to a place of kindness, a place of love and doing good in the world. Like that's ultimately finding joy in every moment. And, and what does that look like? How can I find that in this moment?
Right. That's beautiful. I think we do have these, to recognize what is our guiding question. And if it's not something, if it's like, why me, or something that's not creating positivity and having us look at things in a positive way, right? And over time, you've come with this question. And I think that it's valuable for people to look at what question are they constantly asking themselves? Because if it's not a good one, right, we can change it. So awesome. I've loved having you and hearing your story and, all that you have to offer. Is there anything that I didn't ask you that you wish that I had asked you today?
Well, my podcast, Creating Confidence, I drop 2 episodes every week. We dive into so many different topics around how to get to the next level, how to challenge yourself to think bigger and get yourself to go bigger. So if anyone's interested in learning more about those topics, definitely check out the show, Creating Confidence with Heather Monahan.
Great. Well, tell us, is there any other, where's a great website for them to go? They can go to the podcast there. Where else can they reach you? And of course, we'll have your book links and everything in the show notes.
My website's heathermonahan.com. I'm on all social media at Heather Monahan, and you can DM me anywhere.
Thank you so much for being here, Heather.
Thanks for having me.
And thank you all for being here, because you realize that productivity is so much more. It's not about time management. I mean, time has nothing to do at the end with whether or not you are really going to be productive. So you see that these topics that we dive into that are deeper, that go into how you show up and how you can look at the world from a different perspective and work smarter, not harder. That's the goal of this show. So thank you for being here. Make sure that you drop Heather a DM, go check out her podcast. And of course, subscribe to the podcast over whether it's Apple or Spotify or wherever you're watching this, and go ahead and leave us a review. So thank you again. And my name is Penny Zenker, and we'll see you in the next episode. Hey, thank you for spending this time with me. It really means a lot. If you're feeling a little off, distracted, overwhelmed, stuck, or just out of sync, remember that's your signal to reset. And that's all it takes, just recognizing one reset moment at a time. So stay tuned for more tips, tools, tricks, stories, strategies, all here on Time to Reset. We'll see you in the next episode.